Can I take you deep, deep into the heart of Swaziland? Down on a sandbar on the banks of the Kamati River under the shadow of the Colombo Mountains. The missionary needed a rest, and so he'd taken his 10-year-old boy and a host of national pastors, and they made a huge camp out on a sandbar. And there they would spend the next 14 days fishing and going out on excursions to hunt giraffe and zebra and all sorts of exotic game. And when they would make their way back in from the hunt, they would bring pieces of ironwood they would find lying about on the ground and pile it up to stockpile for the fire. But the first thing they did when camp was pitched, they cleared a spot on that sandbar to start a fire that would not go out for 14 days, a fire that would continue to be supplied by that ironwood. And they would sit around the campfire every night, and the stars would twinkle in a clear sky. The hippopotami would splash the water. The nighthawks would screech. The baboon would howl. It was a beautiful, beautiful Africa summer night. Sitting there after about a week had passed in front of a massive campfire, one of the national pastors, Joseph, who was renowned for his stories, was telling an amazing story. And everyone was spellbound as this loose-lipped Swazi just spun a yarn that was unbelievably enticing. The missionary's son, who was 10 years old, was sitting at the knees of Joseph with his back resting against Joseph's knees, listening to the story, gazing into the fire. In the middle of that story, when every ear was tuned sharply to what Joseph was saying, the missionary's son was gazing into that bed of ashes that had now grown to about 10 inches deep and mostly red-hot coals. As he was gazing into that fire, listening to that story, all of a sudden, from underneath those coals, like a wave in the ocean, something just rose up in the night. The missionary's son could not believe what he was seeing. How could coals move like that? But they did. He began to push his bare feet into the sand and dig and push back against Joseph's knees when all of a sudden that bed of coals rose up the second time. This time he was ready not only to push back but to get up. And before he could get up and start moving, coming out of the heart of that bed of coals came a giant king cobra, thrusting its head through that fire, through those pieces of wood, only to vainly be engulfed in the flames and to fall limply back in the burning coals. What they did not know is that they had built their campfire on the winter burrow of a king cobra. And as that fire began to burn and the radiant heat from that fire was working its way down into that sand, it finally got so unbearably hot that king cobra had to come out, and he did. When everything had settled down, Joseph was ready to start his story again. Before he started his story, he took that big, massive hand of his and laid it on that 10-year-old boy's shoulder. And he said to him, "Missionary son, there's an unbelievable lesson to learn here." He said, there will be times in your walk with God that God himself will come in his fiery presence. And when he does, if there's anything in our life that shouldn't be there, it's going to move. It's going to be exposed. He said, missionary son, these are God moments. And God expects a response. He expects you to do something. There are God moments in all of our lives. And when those moments come, God expects a response. God moments are interesting. They come and just intersect with us in the ordinary activities of life. It's not necessarily in the middle of a revival meeting or anything specially that's spiritual. It just happens in the walk and in the journey of an ordinary life. God suddenly steps in. Abraham was just, as far as we know, was a common shepherd, a laborer of some sort in Ur of the Chaldees, when all of a sudden the Bible says the God of glory stepped into his world and said, "Leave your father's house." On an occasion when after he had left his father's house, he was now in the plains of Mamre, all of a sudden sitting in the door of his tent, he sees three men on a journey. It turns out that one is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. And they sit down and have a lunch. And in that God moment, Abraham finds out he's going to be a father. Moses, on the backside of the desert, herding sheep, on a common ordinary day, suddenly looked up and a bush was on fire and not being consumed. And when he went to see, he had an encounter with God. It was a God moment. The Apostle Paul, who was a good Pharisee, who had killed a number of Christians and imprisoned Christians, had gone to the Sanhedrin, to the councils, and had papers rolled up in his pocket on his way to Damascus with a bit in his teeth to destroy more Christians. And while on that journey doing what he did, suddenly a great light appeared. And it was a God moment in the life of Paul. You say, "Brother Avery, I haven't had anything quite like a burning bush or a great light or an appearance of the God of glory. Haven't even had lunch with God yet." I understand how you can sort of make that seem something really, really grandiose. But I want to tell you something. God steps in to each of our lives in just some very plain, ordinary ways. God moments happen, and they happen in all of our lives. And when they happen for three reasons. God moments are revelational. He steps into our world to tell us something. He steps into our world to reveal something about the nature of who He is. They're revelational in their character. You know, Moses asked God said, "Show me thy glory." And God said, "No, you're not going to see my glory, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cause my goodness to pass in front of you, and I'll reveal my character to you. I'll tell you who I am. I'm going to tell you something about myself." That was a God moment, when God suddenly reveals something about Himself to you. I've watched students over 22 years stand in this chapel and say, "Brother Avery, all of a sudden I see something about what it means to really love God or live for God or walk with God." It was a God moment. God moments are revelational. They show us something about the character of God that you and I need to see. But God moments are also transformational. God always brings change. It's interesting when God spoke to Ezekiel and He said, "You tell the people that if they go to the temple and they enter in through the eastern gate, they're not to exit that gate. Or if they go in by the southern gate, they're not to exit that gate." He was simply saying, whichever door you go in, you can't go out the same door. Why would God care? God was giving a picture lesson here that when we come into His presence, we never leave the same way. God moments are transformational. They do something to us inwardly. But not only that, God moments are directional. Now I want you to hear me very, very clearly. You see, I don't believe that every time you need to make a decision, God suddenly appears in a cloud of glory and says, "This way." No, I don't believe that at all. But I do believe there are crucial moments in our life when God steps in and gives clear direction because we could not get that direction for any other reason. Our ears are closed. We've shut ourselves off from those that could speak to us or help us. We may be running in rebellion. There may be a dozen reasons why, but all of a sudden, God steps into our world and says, "No, here's the path I want you to take." God moments are directional. As a matter of fact, we have two living illustrations tonight in this service that are going to talk to us. Kent's first.
Well, I was 18, and I was a senior in high school, and I was right where you are. I came to my last VIP day as a freshman, as a senior in high school. Didn't really know what to do. My family had been a part of GBS culture. My grandparents had attended here, my parents, my sister was here. It was familiar to me, but I had no clue really what God wanted for me. And at that point in time, I just didn't really know what God was saying to me. Didn't really hear his voice. But it was in that service, this service, I was sitting right over in this area, right over there. We'd gone through the events of the day, all this information, heads rattling, and President Avery gets up and he speaks. And it was like, it wasn't a lightning bolt, it wasn't anything grand, but it was like a still small voice just came to me and said, "This is where I want you to be." And it was probably one of the first times I can really remember a directional change in my life from God. This is where I want you to go. And it's from that point, that moment in my life, that has shaped the rest of my future. I would never have dreamed from sitting in that point 7 years ago that this is where I would be today. But it's from that decision that I found a wife, I found lifelong friends, I found out more about God, and he's led me every step of the way from that one little moment, that God moment in my life.
You see, God moments are directional. God will step into our world to set the trajectory of our life for years to come. Another young man, a little older, came on a VIP day, determined to go to the University of Cincinnati as an engineer. I believe, well, just let him tell you.
Good evening. I was a senior in high school, and I had enrolled at the University of Cincinnati as an engineering student. And through the influence of some family members, I came to VIP Day my senior year, already enrolled at the university, and I had a scholarship to study engineering there, and I was really happy. And I came here, and this place is amazing in so many ways, but it's a place that God speaks to people, and he spoke to me that day. And I actually had an audition the next week, and so during like the game softball stuff that people do, I was actually in the music studio practicing in the very back practice room on the left-hand side. I walk through it every day now as I come to work. And God really began to deal with me. And I remember the two questions he was asking me sitting in that room. It really convicted me. He said, number one, do you really think that you're better at running your life than I am? And do you really believe that I'm good? Can you trust me? And I started a journey the next few months after that, and I finally, as we often try to do sometimes, I tried to make a deal with God. Okay, I'll take all my classes at the university, and I'll have a Bible class at GBS, and that'll be great, right? And actually ended up in band here too. But the university didn't start till September 25th, and GBS started earlier. So I had to come down and enroll here and start attending classes. Well, Revival was at the beginning of school. And I remember Wednesday evening of Revival, President Avery was up and he was speaking. And he said, do you have a yes sign in the bottom of your heart for whatever God has for you? And it was in that moment that I realized I didn't. I was following God, but God asked me in light of everything that he had done to present myself a living sacrifice, I had a Romans 12 moment right there at that altar. And it wasn't some long drawn out thing, but I gave my immature self from kind of a different background to him. And my life has never been the same. I've had so many great times on this campus, from transformative relationships. I just had a friend text me this afternoon, hey, I'm praying right now. What can I pray for you about? The relationships I've formed here, the Tuesday night prayer meetings, the ways I see God come through in people's lives. It was amazing, and it started at VIP Day, and it really started, actually, I ended up praying on the girls' side. I didn't know the protocol. I was a freshman. But I was praying right there, and God did a work in me. And as I've surrendered my life to him, it's never been the same. And he's good, and you can trust him. Amen.
At a VIP day about 5 years ago, a young man from Virginia knelt right here. And others were praying, but he was really praying. And when I was kneeling down to pray with him, he looked up with tears running down his face. And he said to me, Brother Avery, I've just accepted the call to preach tonight. Now, lest you think I'm trying to give you a very slick and subtle PR spiel to come to GBS, I'm not. I'm talking about something much bigger than that. I'm talking about a God moment. A God moment that can change your life forever. As a 17-year-old boy in a little small Wesleyan Methodist church, then later Bible Methodist church, in a little community called Friendship, Alabama, that had no stop sign, street lights, but sat on the edge of a national forest. Completely detached from the mainstream holiness movement. Didn't really know a lot. Didn't have a lot of saints hanging around. I was in deep, deep rebellion. I tell people sometime I was a leftover from the hippie generation, if you can remember anything about that. Long hair, big bell-bottom pants, white shoes, white belts. I had a pair of red, white, and patent leather shoes. I looked like a neon sign moving down the street. But I was in deep rebellion. I was plugged into football, basketball. I wanted to do my own thing. I was running with the wrong crowd, trying to get into everything I could get into. But my mother was praying and holding on to God for me. A little weekend meeting in March. I didn't want to go, and I wasn't going to go. I was in open rebellion, animosity with my dad, fighting against him, rebelling in every way I could. But I knew there was one thing there was no getting out of, and that was going to church. And I had to go to church. And so I had to be there. And on Sunday night, sitting in the back, fist clenched, determined to get out that door as soon as the last amen was said, I had a God moment. I had a God moment. God stepped in to that little church in a way that I'd never seen and got a hold of me and radically and totally changed me and changed the trajectory of my life completely. But God moments are rare. Don't get the idea they happen every day. Go back and look at Abraham's life. There were maybe 3 God moments. Moses, 2, maybe 3. The Apostle Paul, a couple. God moments are rare. And God doesn't waste His glory and His energy and His moving. He steps into our world for a specific reason, and He expects a decision on our part. But when those moments happen, and you respond rightly to those moments, you will be forever changed. Forever changed. I wouldn't tell this unless he had already told it himself. Matter of fact, you heard a little condensed version in I8C about that much of it. He's told it right here on campus, the whole story. I won't tell the whole story. I'll tell about that much of it. But did you hear Dwight Crosley preach at IHC? Was it Tuesday night or Wednesday night? One night. Dwight grew up in a 5-star Christian home. Actually grew up right on this campus as a kid, trailing his mom and dad back and forth to the academy. His dad was the principal here for a number of years. Finished his growing up years in Bedford, 5-star church, great environment. Anytime you'd have met Dwight, you would have thought you were meeting an absolutely the poster boy, the poster kid for all Christian young men. First class, 5-star. Couldn't be beat. Knew how to shake your hand, look you in the eye. Knew how to do it right. Came here to school. Came as a freshman. Made a quartet. Beautiful voice. Fantastic up front personality. But lingering and slumbering beneath all of that fantastic young American boy charisma was a deep stronghold of sin in his life. Well hidden. Nobody knew. But all of a sudden, as God is so able and apt to do, He has a way of erupting those things and bringing them to the surface. And He did it in his life. And all of a sudden, he was faced with a God moment. A deliberate God moment. God stepped into his world. And I'll never forget the day in my office, seated across from Dwight, when Dwight said, "I'm coming clean, I'm coming clear, I'm going to do everything necessary to get my life right with God." You heard him the other night. He said it was a crisis moment. And it happened. And that one single moment, it could literally a few hours, Dwight Crosley suddenly left a life of shell living, dark living, and suddenly was transformed into a young man of humility and brokenness and deep love for Christ. He went through a period of suffering for that. He came out of that, came back on top, married a beautiful girl, and is now pastoring tonight. And his life is forever changed. Young folks, I'm here tonight with a very, very simple statement that God will use tonight as a God moment in your life. Now, I know some of you are out lost in la-la land, and God understands that too. But some of you aren't. Some of you are dead on, and God is speaking to you tonight. And this can be a God moment for you. And you need to respond to Him. You need to step out and respond to Him as He speaks to you. And whatever it is He has to say, you need to let Him say it. And you need to determine down in the bottom of your heart that I'm going to follow whatever God has to say to me about. The bigger picture is not GBS and whether I'm going to come here. That's not the point tonight. The point is, are you going to follow Him? That's the point. That's the passion of my heart. Are you going to be all His? Completely, totally surrendered and yielded to Him? Or you're going to be obedient and learn to walk in His path and follow after Him and pursue Him wherever that leads? That's what I'm concerned about tonight. This can be a God moment for you. I want you to stand. There's not going to be any playing, not going to be any singing, not going to be anything that might drive or push you emotionally, period.